In this video, I'm going to show how to replace the knock sensor on this Lexus IS250. This is located under the intake manifold, which has to come off to do this job. Let's get started. Remove your engine cover if your vehicle has one. There should be one here, but mine is already missing, so I'm going to skip this step. It'll be attached with a 10mm bolt in the back, in the center, and then 2 pins at the front that you can just pry up on. Let's get this intake tubing out of the way. We'll start with the clamp that's near the air box, and we'll use a 10mm socket to loosen that up. With this loosened up, we'll leave it right here for now. A little bit further up, you'll see this hose right here. It's got a clamp that you can pinch with your hand, twist it, and pull it right off. On the throttle body side, there's a 10mm headed screw that holds this clamp down tight, and we need to loosen this up to release pressure off the clamp. All right, now you can pull this off the throttle body and off of the air filter, and there we go. Let's remove the throttle body off of the intake manifold. It's got 4 10mm headed bolts, and I'm going to just unbolt it and leave it here, and that's because there's coolant going through it, and I do not want to disconnect any coolant hoses, and there really is no reason to fully remove this. I just need to unbolt it from the throttle body like I said, so let's remove all 4 bolts. Now we can pull this away. I'm going to unplug it just so that there isn't any excessive pressure on the pins or the wires on the connector, and we're just going to let it hang right here. Now if we pull the throttle body away gently, there is supposed to be a bracket right here. Mine is missing. Somebody has taken it off and not put it back on. It should have a 10mm headed bolt going through here and 2 right in here. Again, it's missing. At this point you would want to remove it. Let's disconnect this solenoid. We have a hose with a little hose clamp. Pull this off. An electrical connector. Take this off. And then a 12mm headed bolt right here. Now you can twist it and the hose will pull off the other end. Set this aside. Let's get some of this wiring disconnected from the intake. Looks like this one already popped off. I'll lift this one up as well. Set that aside. There's a hose here. Goes to the throttle body with coolant, so we'll pop this off. We'll just move it out of the way. Towards the back side of the intake, we have this electrical connector for the intake runners. And I'm going to unplug this, set that aside. Over here, we have a clamp that holds down this vacuum hose. Goes to the brake booster. We'll have to pinch that clamp, pull it back, and then remove the hose very gently. There we go. We have to disconnect this cold start injector, and I don't want to disconnect the banjo bolt because I don't have new washers to seal it up at the end, and this is somewhat high pressure fuel in here. So I'm going to remove this plate and therefore the 2 10mm headed bolts. And with those unbolted, we'll just pull it straight back. There we go, we'll set that aside. There's a retainer for this harness on the back side of the intake, so we'll pinch those 2 tabs and push the harness down. On the back side of the intake, right near the driver's side strut tower, you'll see that on the valve cover there's a 12mm headed bolt that holds the intake down. Let's remove this. Now let's start from the outer edges and work our way towards the center and unbolt this intake manifold. There are several 10mm headed mounting nuts on studs, and there are also several 5mm Allen head bolts here. I'm going to break them all free, and then we will remove them the rest of the way. Can lift this and slide it out of our way. There's a hose on the back side right here. I'm going to pull this hose off of the valve cover just because it's easier and I want it completely out of my way. All right, move the intake. It's time to remove the lower intake, but before we do that, there are some connectors to unplug at the back. One is this one over here. Okay, set that aside. This one should be clipped on, but it has lost its retainer. There's another plug to unplug over here. We'll set that aside as well. Now we'll use a 12mm socket, and same thing as for the upper intake, we'll go from the outer bolts towards the inner, break them free, and then remove them the rest of the way. There are 8 fasteners in total, 4 bolts and 4 mounting nuts. With all of those off, we can lift the lower intake up and out of the way. This gasket came off with the intake for me, so I'll just remove the other one that's left on here. Always replace these when you remove the intake. Next, we have to disconnect some fuel lines, starting with this line that's on the high pressure pump. Use a 19mm wrench, put it right on this fitting, and we'll loosen it up. All right, get that off of there. There's a bolt right here for this line that I want to remove just to give myself a little bit of extra clearance on that fuel line. Follow that line to the other end. You'll see where it bolts on to one of the fuel rails on the back of it with 2 10mm headed bolts. Let's break both of these free and remove them, and then remove the line. There we go. All right, there it goes. Take this out gently, carefully, set it aside. Let's remove this crossover pipe here. Use a 10mm socket and remove all 4 bolts, and then pull this line out. All right, there it goes. We'll let that drain. Perfect. Let's unclip the harness that goes over these retainers. It's easiest to do this with a pocket screwdriver. You have to pry this little tab out and then lift up on the retainer. Try not to break it, although it does happen often, and if you do, it's not the end of the world. It just won't lock in when you re-secure it. Now we have to disconnect the 4 fasteners that hold each fuel rail on. There will be 2 mounting nuts and 2 bolts on each fuel rail. We'll start with this one that's on the driver's side. They are 12mm in size, so let's break them free and then pull them off, and then of course remove the fuel rail. Now let's grab onto the fuel rail with the connectors still connected, because we have no other choice yet, and pull it straight out. The injectors are going in at an angle, and you want to follow that angle to remove it. Try not to pry too much so that you don't damage anything by accident. There we go. There we go. I use this screwdriver that is bent as a pry bar, and I wedged it underneath so that I can take up the space here, pried on one side, wedged it more, and so on. So now this side is disengaged and has popped off, so we're going to slide it up until we can get to the connectors, and now unplug all of the injectors. All right, on the back side of this fuel rail there's a hose, so what I can do is I can just swivel it out of the way like this. Try not to tilt it too much so you don't lose any fuel, but also try to not hit the tip of the injectors. Right now I have it kind of floating and wedged over here. So the tip of the injectors are safe. They are very delicate, and if you touch them up against anything or hit them, it could actually cause the injector not to spray fuel correctly anymore. Now we can get this harness out of our way and do the same thing to the other side fuel rail. Okay, there goes one side. If you'll notice, the fuel rail that we're disconnecting right now has this sensor on the back of it, and it goes behind this water outlet port and hooks onto this retainer and connector right here. Let's disconnect it here. I would like to have some extra slack in this wire and preferably just take this out completely. This fuel rail won't be attached to anything after we pop this out. So let's just unhook that connector, disconnect it, and then finish removing our fuel rail. So now we have extra space here in this wire. Now we have to bring this up enough to be able to unplug the injectors. Looks like for me, one of the injectors actually stayed on the engine side, which is not great, but it can happen. So I'll reach down and unplug it from there. Okay, take the fuel rail, set it aside. My injector that's stuck is this first one, injector number 1, and it's stuck. I cannot remove it. If I try to turn it and twist it, it's making sounds that I don't want to hear. So I'm just going to leave it here. Everything will be just fine if I reassemble it the way that it came off. So now we can continue with our job. And now in the valley of the engine, we can see the 2 knock sensors. Both are the same, and you always want to replace both at the same time. So we'll start with this one, because even if you were to do this one, well, the connector is in the way of this bolt. So let's take this bolt off, and I find it easier to unplug this once it's up and in my hand. If you want to unplug it now, go ahead, but like I said, it's easier to just remove it first. Let's use a 12mm socket. Break this free and remove it the rest of the way. Much easier to disconnect once you have it up. Press on the connector or the locking tab, slide this out, and there's one of your knock sensors. Take your new knock sensor and plug it in until it clicks. Make sure the mating surface is clean. You don't want any rust or corrosion here or other debris, because it can impact the reading of the knock sensor. You want it to be flush and flat up against here. And then we'll put the bolt through. We'll bottom it out all the way, and then we'll torque it. It's very important that you torque it down so that it can take the proper reading. You don't want it too loose or too tight. Make sure the connector is facing in the right direction. So now, let's snug it up really quick, and then I'll grab the torque wrench and torque it down. Once again, making sure that the knock sensor is still parallel with the engine, I'm going to torque this to 15 foot-pounds. All right, that is torqued. Of course, you would do the same thing to the other sensor. It's time to get the fuel injectors back in, and the rails, of course. What I've already just done, and I recommend you do the same if you have access to compressed air, is use a blow nozzle, go inside the holes of where the injectors seat, and just blow some compressed air. That'll shoot out any debris that's in there, if sand or other dirt got inside. And then what we'll do is spray a little bit of brake parts cleaner on each injector as it goes down in the hole that it seats in, so that it can actually slide down. Now, I find that this works better than maybe silicone paste or any other type of lubricant. If you have carburetor cleaner, you could use that. It's a little bit less potent than brake parts cleaner, but just a little spray of it on the O-rings will help it slide down easily, and then it will evaporate, and unlike grease, it won't build up any gunk in the future. So I'm gonna get my harness in position. This will be a little tricky because I have that one injector that's stuck down in the head. So I'm gonna have to somehow maneuver this in a way in which I can plug these two in and then leave that one unplugged and plug it in after. When you press these on, the connectors, you want to make sure they click and that they're firmly locked in. You don't want this to come undone as you're driving the vehicle. So, all of them are connected. The rail wants to seat down here, and then this connector on the back is pretty much where it's supposed to be. I'm going to pull it up slightly, give it that little spray of brake parts cleaner, and then press it down all the way. Okay, that just seated fully. I felt it lock in. I'm going to double check my electrical connectors. That's good. Everything is seated properly. I'm just going to lock in my wiring harness now that it's here and accessible before I forget. And now we can bolt on the fuel rail. There were 2 bolts and 2 mounting nuts. Torque these fasteners to 19 foot-pounds. I'll start in the middle just like when I snugged them so I can make sure everything's seated fully. I'll double check them all. Okay, let's resecure the harness that comes off the back of that fuel rail right onto this retainer, and then plug it in to its connector. There we go. Let's do the same thing to the other side fuel rail. I've already cleaned out the ports that the injectors go into, so let's just line it up, spray it, drop it down, and secure it. Plug all the injectors in. I'm going to secure my harness, double check all my plugs, and let's fasten it down with the mounting nuts and the mounting bolts. "19 foot-pounds" for this as well. All right, those are torqued. Drop this fuel line back down. Make sure you press it in all the way and reconnect it with the 4 fasteners. Unlike the line that goes on the rear, these fasteners are a little bit longer and they do not have a washer on the head of the bolt. They have a little flat area, but the bolts for the rear line have a built-in washer. So you don't want those. You want these without the washer. There will be 4 of them. Torque these to 7 foot-pounds. You definitely want to make sure you don't over-tighten these if you're doing them by hand and you're unable to torque them. Just about 1/8 of a turn at most after they bottom out is plenty. They're going into an aluminum fuel rail. It's a small bolt. Make sure you don't strip that out. Let's get the other fuel line installed. I'm going to fish it back in and make sure it lines up with the high pressure pump. And then I'll drop it down onto the fuel rail. There we go. I'm going to make sure that I start it on the pump first. That just started very smoothly. So I know it's lined up. So now I can put in the 2 bolts here. Once again, these were the ones that had the floating washer on there. Torque these to 7 foot-pounds as well. This nut right here on the flared fitting on the high pressure fuel pump side should get torqued to 22 foot-pounds. If you have a way to torque it, go ahead. I don't, so I'm just going to take my wrench and make it nice and tight. Okay, that just bottomed out and got snug. All right, that is nice and tight. In the end, what this is a flared fitting that fits into the other side of it, so you just have to squish them a little bit, and that makes the seal that you're looking for. I ended up taking a bolt out of this, so I'm going to put it back at this point to re-secure this line. This is the return fuel line, so it actually served me well that I took it off because I was able to move it around a lot more when we took off one of those fuel rails. Just got this nice and snug. Next, we have to clean up the mating surface where the intake bolts onto, and there really isn't much for me to clean here. Mine is in very good shape. I'm going to scrape off with a scraper a little bit of the dirt and corrosion that is built up around the edge, but that's pretty much it. Other than that, I will just take a rag with some brake parts cleaner just to degrease the surface, making sure there are no oils or other fine dust and sand and debris that's stuck here. Now, if you don't have a scraper, you could use a razor blade. Make sure you scrape away from the intake ports. Of course, you don't want anything to fall in there. Then we'll be ready to put on our new gaskets and, of course, the intake. Now let's put our gaskets on. The passenger side bank, or bank 1, is going to get gaskets that have the blue silicone rubbery part facing up, and the hole that's a little bit oblong will be closest to the front of the engine. Now the other side head, you're going to have to take that gasket and flip it upside down. Same thing, the oblong hole towards the front of the head and the bluish color facing down. Now you want to make sure the intake is just as clean as the engine and do the same thing, scrape it if necessary, degrease it, and then let's put it on. Take your intake and slide it down over the studs that help it line up. Make sure the gaskets are still properly seated, and let's put back all the bolts that hold this on. I'm going to tighten these up, starting from the center out. First, I'll snug them to seat the intake, and then we'll come back around and torque them all. Torque all of these to 15 foot-pounds. I'm going to do 2 passes just to double check that everything is torqued. All right, double check them all. And that is torqued. At the back of the intake, we had 2 connectors to plug back in. One is this one over here, and the other one right over here. Make sure they both click and lock in. Let's clean the top of the lower intake manifold. Mine is actually in great shape. It is very, very clean, so I'm going to just wipe it off with a rag. There's nothing for me to scrape off or wipe off or anything, so I'm just going to leave this as is. But for you, make sure you scrape any debris, any corrosion, any dirt buildup here nice and flat. Don't get it inside the runners, of course. Scrape towards the outside. Then this lower intake will be ready for the upper intake. On the upper intake, let's remove the old gaskets, discard them, clean the area, and then install new gaskets. You can clean this in a couple different ways. You could stick a rag in here with a screwdriver and follow it along. You could spray a little bit of brake parts cleaner. Try not to spray too much. This is plastic after all. And then use some compressed air to blow it out. Or if yours for some reason isn't dirty at all or oily, just wipe it off and install the new gaskets directly. Now install the new gaskets, making sure that everything lines up. There are 2 tabs here that need to stick out in opposite directions, and then of course the link in the center that connects the two also has to line up. Now, one runner is a little bit larger than the other. Well, not the runner itself, but the cutout for the gasket. So you need to make sure that that falls into position. If you find yourself having to squeeze the gasket in on one side and pull on it to fit it on the other side, you have it flipped around. This is a great example right here. This one feels smaller and this one feels bigger. So we're going to flip it around and it works perfectly. With all of these gaskets replaced, it is time to install the intake. Before sliding the intake manifold on, make sure you reconnect this hose. If you also disconnected it right here on the PCV valve, on the driver's side valve cover, make sure that clamp goes back on. Now pivot the intake over the mounting studs that are on the lower intake. Line everything up. Once it drops down, you know that it's in position and lined up. So let's start all of the hardware up front here. It's important to start these by hand to ensure that they're actually threading on and will not be cross-threading. Let's start snugging these up from the center in a cross pattern towards the outer ones. To torque these, we're going to torque the Allen head bolts first with a 5mm Allen, and the torque for those is 13 foot-pounds, starting from the center in a cross pattern towards the outer ones. Don't touch the mounting nuts yet, and we will not touch the 12mm headed one, just the Allen headed bolts. Once again, 13 foot-pounds. Double check them. Now torque the 2 mounting nuts to 12 foot-pounds. Now let's reinstall the 12mm headed bolt on the back of the intake that goes into the valve cover. Snug it up. We'll torque this to 15 foot-pounds. Let's get the cold start injector reinstalled. Line it up, press it in all the way, and reinstall the 2 bolts that secure it on. We'll get these snugged up. That's bottomed out and snug. I'll give it a tiny bit extra, and that's it. There's an O-ring in here that'll seal things up, so you don't need to go crazy. It'll actually damage the plastic and the insert that's in there. There we go. Over here we have a couple things to reconnect. One is this harness, reattach it to the intake, and 2 is this hose that goes to the brake booster. It's just a vacuum hose, so put that hose clamp back on the way it came off so it can seal up properly. And over here, reconnect this motor. Let's reinstall the purge valve, line it up with where the hose is supposed to go on the air intake, and then line up the bracket. Install the bolt to secure it. Snug it up. Reinstall this hose. Get the hose clamp back on it. And reconnect the electrical connector for it. Make sure it clicks. Let's line up the throttle body with the air intake. I'm going to start on all 4 bolts, and then we'll bottom them out and torque them. I'm going to snug these up in a cross pattern so that this can seat evenly. We'll torque these to 7 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. All right, those are tight. Plug this in, make sure it clicks. Now let's secure this hose to the intake as well as this harness. Reinstall the air inlet tube. Put it on one side first and then on the other side. It should slide over smoothly. Reattach this hose in the center and secure it with the clamp. Snug up one of the clamps. You don't need to go until it's completely tightened. You just need to go until it's snug enough to where you can't spin this, and that's plenty. Same goes for this. Snug it up. If you can't spin it, that's perfect. Now, if you had an engine cover, you'd put it back on. Again, mine is missing.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.